all the negativity in wrestling in recent weeks, I thought, let's talk about something that we really enjoy. For me, my first WrestleMania. Now, I'm going to date myself here. My first WrestleMania was WrestleMania 8. It took place on April 5th, 1992, the date of my mum's 30th birthday, and was, of course, one of the more disappointing WrestleManias as far as wrestling fans are concerned. But let's be honest, you always remember your first. And for me, this is probably my favorite one. Now, I have a soft spot for WrestleMania 10. I have certain memories about later ones, WrestleMania 20 especially standing out for me. And there's other ones. WrestleMania 25 was a great card. But for me, WrestleMania 8 was the most perfect show. As a kid, I watched this repeatedly. I remember having the VHS. I remember ripping out that little tab that meant that nobody could record over it, just to make sure that it didn't get recorded over, because I wanted to keep watching it again and again. Bear in mind, this is before the internet was a big thing. I didn't get internet till 2001, 2002. So from my point of view, if I lost that tape, I was never going to see it again. I could go out my way and buy the tape, but I didn't have the money to go and buy all the WrestleManias I wanted to watch, all the WCW shows I wanted to watch. So for me, having this on VHS was just this amazing thing, taped off the sky, so there's adverts after every match. But this was one of the first shows WWF did that advertised two main events. Two of the wrong main events, as far as I'm concerned. Sid Vicious versus Hulk Hogan, and Ric Flair versus Macho Man Randy Savage. Now, in hindsight, it's probably the right call to put Randy Savage and Ric Flair together. That was a great match with an interesting story, if not the best. It was still something to put both those guys in prominent positions on the card. We did get to see Sid Vicious versus Hulk Hogan headline WrestleMania, and let's be fair, at least they showed up. I mean, it wasn't a great match, but it was what Hulk Hogan was good at. You make the other guy look like a monster, and then somehow at the end you look good. Now, we will talk about match by match what happened on the show. However, for me, WrestleMania is always going to be remembered as the first time I ever saw a stadium show. Now, the stadium shows are regular today, but having seen my first WWF show in November of 1991, yes, I can remember it. I've written about it in somewhere else. I'm not going to mention where. But I've written about it somewhere else because for me, you never forget your first. WrestleMania 8 was my first. Now, Indianapolis, Indiana, at the Hoosier Dome. This is one of those venues that when you look at it, it is insanely cool as a kid. And I'm going to be honest, I really, really enjoyed it. Now, WWF had quite a few stories going on at the time, and one of the things that interested me, particularly going forward, was the fact that Shawn Michaels became the guy who would open WrestleMania. He became the guy who later on who would dominate WrestleMania, and he would then become Mr. WrestleMania. But for me, my first ever match that I watched at WrestleMania involved Shawn Michaels. One of the little known facts, though, that everybody seems to forget is that WrestleMania doesn't just go live. Before the show went live, the Bushwhackers, remember these guys? They defeated the Beverly Brothers. Now, everybody loves the Bushwhackers. They're entertaining. They're a bit of fun. The Beverly Brothers, on the other hand, now that's a team that I really liked. They're two guys that I thought should have been more over. But remember, they were in WWF at a time when they had the Legion of Doom, they had Million Dollar Man, Ted DiBiase, and IRS, they had the Steiner brothers. It's very hard for them to take the limelight, especially with their style being more like the territories as opposed to the WWF. Perhaps had they come 2 years either side, 2 years later, in 1995-96, Mike Enos would be in WCW and would be one of the guys in the ring when Razor Ramon, Scott Hall showed up. But had the Beverly Brothers been a tag team in WWF at that point, they may have got over a little bit more than they did. I personally, huge fan of them. Bushwhackers defeated the Beverly Brothers. Now, Shawn Michaels would open the show defeating Tito Santana after Reba McEntire did the honors of the national anthem. Now, for me, I always kind of skipped the national anthem as a kid, and just now I think I'm part of the YouTube culture as well. Even though my age says I probably shouldn't be, I do skip. If I'm watching live, I know you can't, but sometimes I love the idea of just being able to skip past the bits you don't like, which means I can watch Raw sometimes in good 20, 25 minutes. But Shawn Michaels defeating Tito Santana in a match that, especially the commentary on this with Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon, was incredible. I'm a massive fan of that partnership. So to see those guys seemingly so excited, but at the same time having to go at each other, that even as a kid, I got that was cool. A little did we know that this was essentially the Snake Roberts' last match next against The Undertaker at WrestleMania. And it was what it was. I really liked the story of The Undertaker's hand being locked in the casket. And I really did think that there was something very cool there about Jake the Snake Roberts, even though I disliked him. I hated him. And then to see him show up in WCW for Halloween Havoc that year as well. Little did I realize that I would go to become a massive fan of Jake the Snake Roberts and really like his promo style and the fact that he didn't do a lot of flashy stuff in the ring. Somebody that, if I was to become a wrestler, I'd want to be like Jake the Snake Roberts or like the man in the next match. Bret Hart defeated Roddy Piper. This was the match that made me a fan. I was watching wrestling because I was a kid and this stuff's cool. But Bret Hart and Roddy Piper, this was the match that made me a fan. This is a match that I sat and watched countless times. And then as an adult, would sit and have beers and watch this match with friends. And we would talk about how such a beautifully crafted story, the fact that we were looking for where Bret Hart bladed. We thought for ages it was real. And then we read Bret Hart's book and we realized, no, it wasn't real. And the fact that Roddy Piper sold it so well and made it look like he did it accidentally. So brilliant, considering Randy Savage and Ric Flair would be fine for bleeding later on. But Bret Hart won the Intercontinental Championship. The end of that storyline involving the Mountie, Jacques Rougeau, and Roddy Piper that had the cattle prod. And Roddy Piper, for some reason, had a T-shirt or a vest that said shockproof. It was stupid looking back on it, but I loved it as a kid. And that's the important thing. You always remember your first. As a kid, this was a great show. We moved on to the Big Boss Man versus, Big Boss Man, Jim Duggan, Sergeant Slaughter, and Virgil versus the Mountie, the Nasty Boys, and the Repo Man. Now, you did have the host of the American version of Family Fortunes. Yeah, Family Fortunes. He came out and did a poll which had the Mountie, the Nasty Boys, and the Repo Man basically getting angry. One line was, if anybody was to call so-and-so two-faced, he damn sure would be wearing the other one. That was one of those cool things as a kid. I didn't get the joke, but I realized the bad guys were angry, so I thought this guy was cool. He's somebody who showed up a few more times at wrestling shows. I believe WrestleMania 9, Survivor Series 93, he was there for the Hart Brothers match. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe that's where he was. We then saw Randy Savage defeat Ric Flair, Miss Elizabeth in Randy Savage's corner, Kurt Hennig in the corner of Ric Flair. And this was the one that had photos being edited, something I didn't think could happen. Photos being edited so that Ric Flair was in the place of Randy Savage to make it look like there was a relationship between him and Miss Elizabeth. Great idea. Everybody hates the idea that somebody would be making a play on your partner. As a kid, didn't understand it. As an adult, married adult, now I look at it and think, do you know what? See, if somebody did that with my wife, I'm damn sure going to be as mad as Randy Savage was. It was a great match, hampered by, for me, what I felt was a rather cheap ending, but it did show that Savage wanted to get that moral victory over Ric Flair by showing the dirtiest player in the game that he could do exactly what he did. For me, that was a great match. Not the match of the night. That goes to Bret Hart and Roddy Piper. But still, getting to see Randy Savage and Ric Flair wrestling together. Ric Flair probably passed his peak by this point, but this is as close to peak Randy Savage and Ric Flair at the same time we're ever going to get. We then saw Tatanka defeat Rick Martel. I'm a massive fan of Rick Martel. He's somebody I think certainly could have done a lot more had he not been hampered by that stupid model gimmick. But also at the same time, Tatanka would go on to have a match at the following year's WrestleMania against Shawn Michaels that I still label as one of my favourite opening matches of WrestleMania. The Natural Disasters, Earthquake and Typhoon, defeated Money Inc. Erwin R. Shyster and Ted DiBiase via countout, so they didn't get the tag team championships. Now, this is a team that we were meant to be cheering. How can you cheer for Earthquake and Typhoon, who are both so massive? How do you get sympathy on those guys? Well, the only way you can get sympathy is by putting them in with the capitalist and the tax man. It's guaranteed to make anybody into the good guy. And I actually remember cheering for the natural disasters, and that was cool. Now, later on in life, I learned a very important lesson from somebody who I won't name, was you almost have the toilet break match before the main event. And the toilet break at various points was the women's match. But at this point, it was Owen Hart versus Skinner. Now, Skinner was Steve Keirn, who would go on to own Florida Championship Wrestling, which evolved into NXT. But Owen Hart versus Skinner, the match before the main event at WrestleMania. Obviously, 2 years later, he would be going in to face his brother Bret, and he would have more WrestleMania matches. But it was really cool to see a Hart brother with a completely different style to Bret. Bret could do drop kicks and stuff, but he didn't do the top rope stuff, at least not very often. So to see Owen Hart out there, now that match only lasted 2 minutes, and it wouldn't be long before he would join up with Coco Beware in High Energy. Again, a team that I really liked as a kid, although what the hell costumes were they wearing? I know it's called ring gear, but they were costumes and they were weird. They were perfectly encapsulating the shell suit culture of the 1990s, and I loved it. I mean, they were weird, but I loved it. And then we move on to the main event. Hulk Hogan defeating Sid Justice, Sid Vicious, Psycho Sid, whatever name he was going under at the time. Sid Udy, who obviously didn't have a softball game that weekend, so he was able to show up for WrestleMania. By disqualification, this is a match that was a bit of a cluster, you know what. Apparently, Papa Shango was meant to make it down to the ring before the 3 counts. So Sid had to kick out. It was a little bit of a mess at the end, and then you had the Ultimate Warrior doing the run-in at the end. Yeah, I didn't mention the Ultimate Warrior there, did I? Didn't mention him. He made the run-in at the end and led to probably the first time ever I saw a conspiracy theory. As a child, I was told this is not the Ultimate Warrior. This is somebody new portraying the Ultimate Warrior. And I thought, does that even happen? Did they just replace people? And then obviously within 2 years, I would see Doink got replaced. And then 2 years after that, you would see Razor Ramon and Diesel got replaced. But for me, there's a lot of flaws in that card. But you look through that and you've got future Hall of Famers, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Bret Hart, Roddy Piper, Bossman, Jim Duggan, Sergeant Slaughter. We won't count Virgil. And then you look at Randy Savage, Ric Flair. Owen Hart has to go in there eventually, you would hope. And then Hulk Hogan. Steve Keirn's impact on the business has been huge. IRS and Ted DiBiase. Ted DiBiase, a clear favorite to go in there. Somebody who has the best laugh in the business. And I'm never going to try and copy his laugh because it's just too hard to copy. But for me, not just because it's my first, I have a soft spot for this card. It's the longest match on the card is 18 minutes. And people say that today our attention span is not quite what it was. But the matches on this card were really, really short. For a kid, this was perfect. WrestleMania 8, for me, my favorite WrestleMania.